Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Freedom Thoughts. As I've shared in my other videos, my topics tend to be related to public policy or politics, but I want to take kind of a different turn this evening. And that's going to be fully discussing the difference between a politician and a statesman. As we look into our political system now, it seems like everything is stalemated and no one actually is looking out for the good of the people they represent. They're all either trying to get elected or trying to push outlandish plans that are never going to get passed simply to get attention or voter attention, essentially to get votes. And I think it's really key that we examine the difference between a politician and a statesman. So simply definitionally, what's the difference? There's mixed ideas, but in general, there's a key. And I'm going to read from this article from the Chronicle. This was from September 11th of 2020. And it kind of gives us an idea of what the difference between a politician and a statesman is. And I'll read a small section of it just to kind of give us an idea. It says, quote, "We hear a lot about politicians, but not enough about statesmen. People think of a politician as someone having one primary objective, to get elected. The general view of a statesman, however, is of someone interested in the common good of constituents and not his own ego." And that's kind of the key. A statesman are your Winston Churchills, your Abraham Lincolns, people that throughout time always considered the people they represented far more than themselves. And as I mentioned with regards to Churchill and Lincoln, I think what we truly need to examine as far as how our elected officials need to act and present themselves, we have to go back into history. I think that's the key. We go back into history and examine some of the greatest examples of this. Because I think there's a major crux that I want to touch on here, and that is politicians, or I'm going to use the term elected officials now because I'm trying to compare between politicians and statesmen. So elected officials have several hard obstacles they have to encounter. And one of those is they're not always going to be able to 100% get what they want. And what I mean by that is, let's say an elected official has the right idea in mind. They're truly trying to represent the people. He's gone, had conversations at people's doors, through phone calls. He's trying to do the job of carefully representing the people in his district or whatever the case may be. And he goes up back to whatever governing body that he is a member of and tries to present what his people have asked for. And he may not get what he wants. And some of it may be directly contradictory to what he thinks is best. But through negotiation, he's able to push forward a bill or proposal that gets 80% of what he wants, but 20% that he really doesn't. Does he move forward on that bill? In some ways, to him personally, harm his conscience because he really doesn't like that 20% that's in there. And I think that's where people view politicians and elected officials specifically here is elected officials as very slimy, always negotiating, and just not in a positive light. But I think we need to examine a historical figure, as I mentioned, who encountered this exact same issue, having to, in a sense, compromise. And there's difference. Compromise usually is a negative connotation, and I'm going to show you how meeting in the middle with another politician across the aisle is something that is absolutely critical and has really been lost in today's society. We never really hear about working across the aisle anymore, and it's just constantly just strife between political parties. And I want to go back to a historical example where the strife was vastly more than what we have now. It can't even really truly be compared. It was way more. So, given that, I want us to look at Henry IV of France. Now, he was a king of France during a period referred to often as the Huguenot Wars. Just to give you a little historical background on this, Queen Catherine of France was a regent, but was basically, in effect, Queen of France. There was a lot of family issues, and the actual king was a young boy, and so she essentially ran the show for France. Now, increasingly, France was becoming Protestant, and in France, the Protestants were referred to as Huguenots. Now, as the Huguenots became increasingly powerful, and what we often see from this is that politics and religion were like this. They were not separate in any measure. And so as Protestants or Huguenots continued to grow, they were viewed as a threat by the royal family, which was Catholic, and the real government in France was still Catholic. So there was some major strife there. This led to wars, and ultimately Henry of Navarre, or what he later became, he was Henry IV of France, he became the future king of France. But in the meantime, he actually led the Protestant or Huguenot army against the royal army and the ruling class of France in an attempt to gain religious freedom, because the Catholics at the time had absolutely brutal prosecution. They persecuted the Protestants and Huguenots of France. So he fought diligently against this, militarily and otherwise. Now, how things ended up working out is the royal line of descendants gets complicated, but he actually, through long years of war, there was many peace treaties. I'm not going to bore you with all those details. But it reached a point where he was going to be direct in line for the throne, and he was going to be the next king. Now, when he first became king, he actually kept his Protestant faith. But he realized very quickly that he was going to have to fight against the Catholic League, which still held power at that point, and he was not able to really get anything done. It was mainly a stalemate, and he wasn't able to achieve anything. And he said, reportedly, and I'm not going to, this may not be an exact quote, but this is what a lot of historians attribute to him, is his quote, "Paris is worth a mass." Now, on its cover, I would be what is considered a Protestant. I'm not a Catholic. But on its face, you could say that Henry of Navarre, King Henry IV, completely compromised himself. He joined the enemy. And in a way, and I think a small-minded way, you might be right. Because it is absolutely critical that in the name of getting things done, we don't compromise who we truly are. But my question would be, did Henry truly compromise on who he was and who he wanted to be for God? And I would say no. I would say he did not. And I'll show you why as we see what he was able to accomplish. Now, over the next years of his reign, he passed some of the greatest religious freedom laws that the country had seen in many years, essentially ending the wars and guaranteeing religious liberties. This was called the Edict of Nantes. This essentially freed up the Protestants to worship as they chose. So he sacrificed and went over to the Catholic faith to save all of his fellow Protestant brethren from persecution. And don't get me wrong, Catholics can worship God and have that same faith relationship. It's just very different. And obviously, Henry had a lot of passion for being a Protestant, but he knew what he had to do, and he executed on it, and ultimately saved his brethren. Henry also went on to accomplish many other great things. He started off by settling Canada, the French. He was the one who originally pushed that forward. He pushed forward tons of literacy in his country. He pushed forward many, many things, and was one of the greatest kings that France had ever seen. But he didn't always do what he wanted. And I think that gets back to the difference between a politician and a statesman. The reason this topic is on my mind a lot right now is I am going to be running for a minor local political office. And I truly want to bring back representation of the people. And that means having constant conversations, being in sync with what their needs. And that's only done through hard work, energy, and communication. And there are going to have to be times where I go back to a legislative body and don't 100% get everything I want. I might have to make some personal sacrifices. But the difference between a politician and a statesman is doing what it takes to get elected and doing what is right for the people you represent. That's what it takes. Doing right for the people you represent. And that might come at some personal loss. Now, I think this is especially true as we look at the broader political spectrum. We don't have a great political environment right now, and that's an understatement. We need to have people in our political offices that aren't trying to get reelected. It's almost counterintuitive. Obviously, an elected official, that's kind of they make it a career, and that's part of the negative. We have these politicians that have been in power for 30 years. They make it a career, and I don't think it really should be that way. We have far too many people in elected offices that are simply trying to get reelected. We need people in there who are actually, truly, honestly doing what is best for the people they represent. Through personal sacrifice that they may have to make, not doing exactly what they want all the time, but truly doing what is best for the people they represent. That's absolutely key, and that is at the foundation of our democracy. I hope you've enjoyed today's video as we discuss going back in history and examining one, not elected official, but someone back in history who held extraordinary power in his country, but made great personal sacrifice to help the people he represented. And that's absolutely key. We need to get into politics and become elected officials so we can achieve this same goal, helping the people we represent and helping the great nation of the United States. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, as that definitely helps my channel out. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put those in the comments below. And hope you have a great rest of the week.